Have you ever wondered what would happen if someone completely stopped cleaning their house for a full 30 days? No sweeping, no wiping, no organizing, just letting time slowly take over the space. At first, nothing seems different. The house still feels calm and completely normal, almost like nothing is changing at all. But quietly, dust is already beginning to settle across tables, shelves, and hidden corners of the house. And as the days continue to pass, those tiny changes slowly build up until the room begins to feel older, heavier, and strangely uncomfortable. Over the next 30 days, we'll slowly watch how an ordinary house transforms when dust, dirt, and clutter are left completely untouched. Day 1 to 5. On the first day, everything inside the house is still in its normal and clean condition. The floor is spotless, the surfaces are organized, and there is no visible dirt or clutter anywhere. At this stage, skipping cleaning does not seem to have any immediate effect on the environment. By the second day, the changes are still very subtle and easy to miss. However, microscopic dust particles from the air begin to settle slowly onto surfaces such as tables, shelves, and open areas. Even though the room still looks clean, the process of gradual accumulation has already started. On the third day, dust accumulation becomes more noticeable, especially in hidden or rarely cleaned areas. Corners of the room, spaces under furniture, and edges along the floor begin to collect visible layers of dirt. These areas are usually ignored, which allows buildup to happen faster compared to open spaces. By the fourth day, the difference becomes clearer when observing closely. Although the room may still appear acceptable from a distance, dust is now spreading across multiple surfaces, and small signs of neglect are visible throughout the environment. The overall cleanliness of the space is gradually decreasing. After 5 days without cleaning, the house begins to feel noticeably different. Dust is now present in several areas, and the overall environment feels less fresh compared to the beginning. The accumulation is still moderate, but the change in atmosphere is becoming easier to recognize. Day 6 to 10. By the 6th day, the accumulation of dust and minor clutter becomes more noticeable even without close inspection. The environment is still manageable, but the first signs of disorder are now difficult to ignore. By the 7th day, clutter begins spreading across multiple areas. The space still functions, but the growing disorder starts to feel visually heavy and harder to manage. By the 8th day, the lack of cleaning starts affecting usability. Movement inside the room becomes more careful as objects begin blocking space. By the 9th day, the environment begins affecting focus and mental comfort. The clutter becomes visually overwhelming and distracting. By the 10th day, the room has fully transitioned into a clearly disorganized and cluttered environment, requiring significant effort to restore. Day 11 to 15. At this point, we are already around day 11, and the house is clearly no longer in its early clean condition. What used to be small, easy-to-ignore clutter has now spread into different areas of the room, slowly becoming part of the environment itself. Movement inside the space starts to feel slightly restricted as more items remain out of place. By the time we reach day 12, the impact becomes more practical. Surfaces like desks and tables are no longer fully usable without first moving things aside. This creates small but constant interruptions during normal daily tasks, making the space feel less efficient and more inconvenient to use. Around day 13, the situation starts to affect more than just physical space. The room begins to feel heavier visually, and this change subtly influences mood and focus. Even though the mess is not yet extreme, it already creates a noticeable sense of discomfort compared to the earlier clean environment. By day 14, disorganization is no longer occasional. It has become a consistent presence across multiple areas of the room. Instead of isolated messes, clutter is now spread throughout the space, making the overall environment feel less structured and harder to mentally ignore. By day 15, the change is fully noticeable. The room is no longer just slightly messy, it has transitioned into a consistently unorganized environment. While still usable, restoring order at this stage would already require focused time and effort rather than a quick cleanup. Day 16 to 20. By day 16, the room begins feeling noticeably more uncomfortable to stay in for long periods of time. Clutter is now present across most commonly used areas, and the remaining clean spaces inside the room are becoming smaller and harder to maintain. The environment no longer feels temporarily messy, it now feels consistently neglected. Around day 17, dust accumulation becomes much easier to notice across frequently used surfaces. Areas that were once cleaned regularly now show visible layers of dirt, especially along shelves, desks, corners, and edges near the floor. The room begins to lose the sense of freshness it originally had. By the time the house reaches day 18, daily activities inside the room start becoming less efficient. Finding specific items takes longer, surfaces are difficult to use properly, and the constant visual clutter begins creating a stronger feeling of mental exhaustion during normal routines. At day 19, the room starts showing clear signs of prolonged neglect. The combination of clutter, dust buildup, and lack of organization creates an environment that feels visually overwhelming even at a quick glance. Restoring order now appears far more difficult than it did during the earlier stages. By day 20, the condition of the house has clearly entered a serious stage of disorganization. Open spaces are heavily reduced. Important areas are partially blocked by clutter, and the room now requires major effort and time to fully restore. What started as small, ignored messes has now developed into a deeply accumulated problem. Day 21 to 25. By day 21, the room begins to feel noticeably heavier and less fresh compared to the earlier weeks. Dust has now settled across most exposed surfaces, and because the environment has remained untouched for a long period of time, the air inside the room may start to feel slightly stale, especially in areas with limited airflow or closed windows. Around day 22, neglected surfaces begin collecting thicker layers of dust and fine debris. Areas that are frequently touched, such as desks, shelves, and handles, may now feel noticeably dirty during normal use. The room is still functional, but the environment no longer feels clean or comfortable to spend time in. By the time the house reaches day 23, the combination of clutter, dust, and stagnant conditions begins affecting the overall atmosphere of the room more strongly. The environment may start developing a slightly unpleasant smell caused by trapped dust, fabric, and lack of regular cleaning or ventilation. At day 24, restoring the room to its original condition becomes significantly more difficult than before. Dust and clutter are now deeply integrated into the environment, meaning cleanup would require not only organizing objects, but also thoroughly cleaning surfaces that have been neglected for weeks. By day 25, the house has fully transitioned into a prolonged neglect stage. The space feels visually exhausting, physically uncomfortable, and increasingly difficult to manage. What originally started as a few ignored messes has now evolved into an environment that requires major time, energy, and discipline to fully recover from. Day 26 to 30. By day 26, the environment inside the house begins feeling consistently unpleasant rather than simply messy. Dust accumulation is now widespread, clutter covers much of the usable space, and the lack of regular cleaning has made the room feel visually exhausting almost immediately after entering. Around day 27, everyday routines inside the room become noticeably more frustrating. Finding items takes longer, surfaces are difficult to use properly, and simple activities now require moving clutter out of the way first. The environment starts actively interfering with daily comfort and efficiency. By the time the house reaches day 28, the prolonged neglect may begin creating hygiene-related concerns. Dust, trapped fabric particles, and stagnant areas inside the room can contribute to an environment that feels increasingly unhealthy and uncomfortable over time, especially in poorly ventilated spaces. At day 29, the psychological effect of the environment becomes much more noticeable. The overwhelming amount of clutter and visible neglect can create feelings of stress, reduced motivation, and mental fatigue, making the idea of cleaning the room feel even more difficult than before. By day 30, the house has completely transformed from a clean and organized space into a severely neglected environment. Dust, clutter, and prolonged lack of maintenance now define the condition of the room, and restoring it would require major cleaning effort, strong discipline, and significant time to fully recover the original state. So after 30 days without cleaning, the change is no longer just visual. What started as a few ignored items and small amounts of dust slowly developed into an uncomfortable and heavily neglected environment. This shows how quickly small daily habits can shape the condition of the space we live in, and why consistent cleaning matters more than most people realize. A clean environment does not become dirty overnight. It happens gradually through small acts of neglect repeated every single day. So, if this breakdown helped you understand what's really happening in your house when you don't clean it for 30 days, Consider subscribing for more real-life explanations like this. See you in the next one.